Mountain Man bought a bride for $5, but what came was a woman covered in blood and half dead. Caleb Wolverine Stone had learned long ago that a man could live without comfort, without company, even without hope, but not without purpose. On the frozen ridge of Raven's Peak, purpose had become survival. He had sent 5 crumpled dollars to a mail-order agency in the city, everything he owned that wasn't nailed down asking for a wife who would brave the mountains and share his solitude. He expected nothing more than a name on a letter and a silent companion who wouldn't run from snow or silence. So, when the rickety coach appeared through the mist that afternoon, he straightened his coat and stepped outside, heart thudding with an emotion he refused to call hope. The driver climbed down, pale and shaking. "You Caleb Stone?" "I am. You got my bride?" The man swallowed hard. "She's in there, but, sir, you should know she's hurt bad." Caleb yanked the door open. Inside, a woman lay crumpled against the seat, her dress soaked dark with dried blood. Her face was swollen, her lips split. Strands of black hair clung to her cheek, stiff with frost. "Good God," Caleb whispered, gathering her into his arms. She was heavier than she looked soft, solid, human. "She said her name's Isabel Crawford," the driver stammered, "ran from a man who beat her half to death. The agency sold her off cheap. $5 was all they'd take." Caleb's jaw clenched. Then $5 bought her freedom. He carried her into his cabin, the snow crunching beneath his boots, the mountain silent around them. He didn't know her story, only that someone had left her to die, and he wasn't about to let that happen. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? The cabin at the edge of Raven's Peak was built for storms, not for tenderness. Its rough-hewn logs kept out the cold, but not the memories. For years, Caleb Stone had lived there in silence, speaking only to the wind and the occasional wolf that came too close. Now, that silence was broken by the faint sound of breathing, shallow, fragile, human. He set the woman down on his bed, his pulse hammering as he pulled the blood-soaked blanket away. She was bruised from neck to ankle, her wrists raw from rope burns. Yet beneath the swelling, he could see traces of softness, the curve of her cheeks, the faint freckles across her nose, the faintest hint of a life once filled with laughter. He fetched warm water from the kettle and began washing her wounds, his big hands trembling in spite of years of battle-hardened calm. "You're safe now," he murmured, though she was too far gone to hear. "No one's going to hurt you here." When she stirred, her eyes fluttered open, glazed with fear. "Please, don't hit me," she whispered. His chest tightened. "I'm not that kind of man." Tears pooled in her eyes. "They said you bought me for $5. He hesitated, setting down the cloth. "I sent money to a matchmaking office, that's true, but I didn't pay for a person. I paid for a chance. Seems like I got something else entirely." Her eyelids drooped again, exhaustion winning. "My name's Isabel." "Rest, Isabel," he said softly. "You're home." By the third day, her fever broke. Caleb sat by her side through the nights, changing bandages, feeding her broth by the spoonful, keeping the fire burning bright. When she finally woke fully, her voice was hoarse but clear. "Why are you helping me?" He looked up from the fire. "Because someone should have." She studied him through the haze of pain. He was unlike any man she'd known, broad shoulders, scarred hands, eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked dangerous, yet spoke like someone who'd already fought all the wars worth fighting. "Are you married?" she asked weakly. "Was," he said. "Once, long time ago." "What happened to her?" Caleb's jaw tensed. "She found someone who preferred the city to the mountains, took my savings, and left me with the snow." "I'm sorry," Isabel whispered. He gave a faint shrug. "Don't be. The mountain teaches you not to chase what doesn't want to stay." That night, as she rested, Caleb sat outside beneath the stars. The cold bit through his coat, but he barely felt it. He thought about the woman sleeping in his bed, a stranger, broken and scarred, but alive. He'd seen men die for less. When he came back inside, she was awake, staring at the firelight flickering against the walls. "You don't have to keep me," she said quietly. "I'll go once I'm strong enough." Caleb crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. "You're not some burden, Isabel. You're not some debt to pay. You're a person, and until you can walk out of here on your own 2 feet, this is your home." Her lips quivered. "I haven't had a home in years." He nodded slowly. "Then it's about damn time you did." For the first time in a long while, she smiled, small, uncertain, but real. And in that moment, Caleb Stone realized something dangerous. He wanted to see that smile again. Outside, the snow fell silently, sealing the cabin in. Inside, 2 lonely souls began to thaw. By the end of the first week, the bruises on Isabel's face had begun to fade from purple to yellow. But the bruises inside her ran deeper. She still flinched at sudden noises, still woke from sleep, gasping for breath. Caleb never asked questions he didn't need answers to. He simply kept the fire warm, the food hot, and the world quiet. When her strength returned, she insisted on helping him. "I can't just lie here," she said one morning, sitting up on the edge of the bed, her dark hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. "Please let me do something." He studied her for a long moment. "You can barely stand." "I'll learn," she said simply. There was steel under the gentleness of her voice, the same kind of will he'd once seen in soldiers who refused to die. Finally, he nodded. "All right, start with feeding the fire." That day, she followed him outside for the first time. The air was sharp and clean, the world spread out before them in endless white. Ravens wheeled overhead, their cries echoing through the canyon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Caleb said quietly. Isabel nodded, clutching her shawl against the cold. "It's wild." He smiled faintly. "So was I once." They walked together to the barn, his stride long and sure, hers cautious but determined. She helped him carry small logs, trembling under the weight, but refusing his offers to help. When she stumbled on the ice, Caleb caught her before she fell, his hand steady around her arm. Their eyes met for the first time without fear between them. "You're shaking," he murmured. "It's cold," she said, though the truth was her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely breathe. He released her slowly, his touch leaving warmth behind. "Let's get you inside before the mountain decides to eat you alive." That night, the wind howled against the cabin walls. Isabel sat close to the fire, sewing the torn hem of her skirt while Caleb sharpened his axe. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was companionable. "Do you ever go down to the town?" she asked softly. "Not unless I have to. Folks talk too much." "About you?" He shrugged. "About everyone. A man who lives alone in the mountains becomes a story after a while. Easier to make him a monster than ask why he's alone." She smiled sadly. They used to say the same about me." He looked up. "What did they say?" "That I was a curse," she said quietly. "That I drove my husband to drink. That I was too fat, too soft, too much of everything a man didn't want." Caleb's eyes hardened. "Sounds like they were fools." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "I used to believe them." He set down the knife and leaned forward, his voice low. "Listen to me, Isabel Crawford. The world's full of cowards who hide behind cruel words because they're afraid of kindness. You don't let them write your story." Her throat tightened. "And what if I don't know how to start again?" He gave her a small, steady smile. "Then I'll help you learn." The next morning, snow began to fall again. They spent the day repairing the barn roof, Isabel holding boards steady, while Caleb hammered them into place. Her fingers grew raw from the cold, but she laughed when the hammer slipped and he cursed under his breath. "I didn't know mountain men used such colorful language," she teased. He grinned, surprised by his own laughter. "You spend a few winters up here, you'll learn a few words, too." For the first time since her arrival, the cabin echoed with laughter, real, unguarded, alive. When the storm finally broke at dusk, Caleb brought her a bowl of hot stew. She looked up from the firelight, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "You saved my life, Caleb." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Maybe you saved mine, too." That night, as the wind died down and the mountain settled into stillness, Isabel lay awake under the quilt, listening to his slow, steady breathing from the chair near the fire. She realized that for the first time in years she wasn't afraid of the night. And somewhere deep in her heart, beneath all the scars, something fragile and new began to grow, not just gratitude, but hope. Winter lingered long on Raven's Peak. The world outside the cabin was a frozen kingdom of white and silence. But inside, life slowly began to return. Isabel's color came back first, her cheeks no longer hollow, but rosy from the firelight. Then came her laughter, soft and hesitant at first, like she was afraid the mountain might punish her for joy. Caleb noticed everything. The way she hummed while stirring soup. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way her eyes brightened whenever he praised her cooking, and how quickly she looked away afterward as if afraid to believe him. He never said much, but he was always there. When her hand trembled while carrying wood, he'd take the heavier logs without a word. When she burned her finger on the stove, he was the first to grab a cold cloth and hold it gently against her skin. "You don't have to look after me," she said one evening, smiling faintly. "Maybe I like looking after you," he said simply. Her heart stumbled at that. Days passed into weeks, and the cabin began to change. Isabel sewed new curtains from old flour sacks, mended Caleb's shirts, and filled the shelves with jars of herbs and preserves. The once barren home began to look alive again, not like a shelter for one man, but like a place meant for two hearts learning how to heal. Caleb built her a small table near the window so she could sew while watching the valley. "You didn't have to," she said softly when he placed it there. He shrugged. "You bring life to this house. The least I can do is give you a place to see it." She turned her head away quickly, blinking back tears. "No one's ever done something kind for me without wanting something in return." Caleb looked at her, steady and calm. "Then maybe it's time someone did." At night, the two would sit by the fire. Sometimes she'd read aloud from the worn Bible she'd carried in her satchel. Sometimes he'd tell her stories about the war, not the fighting, but the men who sang songs to drown out fear, the horses that refused to leave their wounded riders behind. It was during one of those quiet evenings that Isabel asked, "Why do they call you Wolverine?" He smiled, a rare and quiet thing. "Got stuck under a collapsed trench once. Took 3 men to dig me out. I came up bleeding but alive, still swinging. My captain said I had more lives than a wolverine." "Is that why you survived this mountain?" He thought about that. "No," he said finally. "I survived because I didn't know what else to do. Until you showed up." Her breath caught. "Me?" He nodded. "You reminded me what it's like to care again." She didn't know what to say, so she reached across the table and touched his hand, just for a moment. His hand was large, scarred, rough from years of work, but he didn't pull away. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me as more than what's been done to me." As spring crept slowly up the mountainside, Isabel's steps grew stronger. One morning, she followed Caleb to the ridge overlooking the valley. The view stole her breath, a sea of green pines stretching to the horizon, sunlight scattering across the river below. "I used to think the world ended beyond the town limits," she said quietly. "Now, I think that's where it really begins." Caleb smiled. "You see that spot down there?" He pointed to a patch of land where the trees thinned near the water. "That's good soil. I was thinking of planting something there, maybe a garden." Her eyes widened. "A garden? On a mountain?" "Sure, why not? I've seen tougher things grow in worse places." He gave her a sidelong look. "You? For example?" She laughed a sound that rang out clear and free, carried away by the wind. That evening, after dinner, she found him whittling wood by the fire. "What are you making?" she asked. He hesitated, then showed her a small carving of a rose, rough but beautiful. "For you," he said. "I thought it might remind you that even up here things can bloom." Her throat tightened. "Caleb, why are you always so kind to me?" He met her eyes. "Because I know what it's like to wish someone had been." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She reached out, taking his hand. "You already saved my life once," she said softly, "but you keep doing it every day." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply took her hand in his and held it until the fire burned low. Outside, the snow began to melt from the pines, dripping down into the dark soil, a promise that even in the coldest places, life could find its way back. By late spring, the valley below Raven's Peak was awake again. Wild flowers blanketed the slopes, and the river sang loud enough to be heard from the cabin porch. Caleb had almost forgotten the rest of the world existed until the knock came. It was a sharp, urgent pounding that didn't belong to mountain silence. Isabel froze, a bowl still in her hands. Caleb's jaw tightened. Few men came this far unless they wanted something. He opened the door to find 2 strangers standing in the yard, one in a brown coat, the other in a sheriff's badge that caught the sun like a blade. "Caleb Stone?" the sheriff asked. "That's right." "I'm Sheriff Dugan out of Red Hollow. We're looking for a woman, Isabel Crawford. Said she ran from her husband down in Carson County." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You'd best tell me why that's any of your business." The sheriff adjusted his hat. "Because her husband's offering a reward. Claims she stole money before she ran." Isabel gasped behind him. The bowl slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Caleb turned, his voice low but steady. "You didn't steal a damn thing, did you?" She shook her head, trembling. "No, but he'll say anything to get me back." The sheriff stepped closer. "Look, I don't care what happened between you two. I'm just here to take her home." Caleb stepped between them, towering. "She is home." The other man, a wiry deputy with mean eyes, sneered. "Careful, mountain man. The law don't like thieves or wife-stealers." Caleb's voice rumbled deep in his chest. "Then maybe the law should stop doing their work for the men who make the women run." The sheriff's gaze hardened. "If she won't come willingly, I'll have to bring her by force." Caleb's hand dropped to the rifle leaning by the door. "You'll have to go through me first." A tense silence fell. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The sheriff studied Caleb for a long moment, then exhaled. "You're making a mistake, Stone. That husband's got friends in high places. This won't end here." "Then you best start climbing," Caleb said coldly, "because this mountain belongs to me, and she's staying." The two men turned their horses and rode off, snow and dust flying behind them. Caleb watched until they vanished, his shoulders tight with anger. Inside, Isabel stood trembling. "They'll come back," she whispered. "He'll find me. He always does." Caleb turned, his expression softening. "Not here. Not while I'm alive." She shook her head. "You don't understand what kind of man he is. He doesn't want me. He wants control. He'll see you as the one who took it from him." Caleb stepped closer, his voice low and calm. "Let him come. I've fought worse things than men like him." Tears filled her eyes. "I can't let you get hurt because of me." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his hand lingering at her cheek. "You're not the reason I'd fight. You're the reason I'd live." Her breath caught, her lips trembling. "You shouldn't have to protect me." "I'm not protecting you because I have to," he said quietly. "I'm doing it because I want to, because you matter." She broke then, leaning against him, sobbing quietly into his chest. He held her until the fear passed, until her shaking stopped. That night, neither of them slept. Caleb sat by the fire, rifle across his knees. Isabel watched him from the chair across the room, the flickering light soft against his face. "Who taught you to be this way?" she asked. He looked up. "This way?" "Good," she said simply. He smiled faintly, a shadow of something long buried. "A woman once told me kindness is a man's greatest weapon. I didn't listen until now." She reached across the space between them, her voice trembling. "Then promise me you'll live. No matter what happens, promise me that." He covered her hand with his thumb brushing her knuckles. "If I live, Isabel Crawford, it'll be for you." Outside, thunder rolled down the mountain, a storm building in the distance. It wasn't just the weather. Trouble was coming, and both of them knew it. The storm broke at dawn. Rain lashed the roof, and wind howled through the cracks like a living thing. Caleb barely noticed. He stood by the window, rifle in hand, watching the narrow trail below the cabin. He'd felt it in his bones all night, the coming reckoning. When the first echo of hooves reached them, Isabel froze. "He's here," she whispered. Caleb turned toward her. "Get inside the back room. Bolt the door." "I won't hide," she said, shaking her head. "Not again. I'm done being afraid." "Then stay behind me," he said. The sound grew louder until 3 riders appeared through the sheets of rain. One of them, tall, heavy-set, with cruel eyes, dismounted first. Isabel's breath caught. "That's him, Samuel Crawford." Her husband looked nothing like a man of love. His coat was expensive, his voice slick with arrogance. "So this is where you've been keeping my property," he sneered. Caleb stepped forward, rain streaming down his face. "She's no man's property." Samuel's lip curled. "She's my wife. She stole from me and ran like a coward. Hand her over, and maybe I'll forget this place ever existed." Caleb's voice dropped low. "You'd best turn that horse around before you leave here on your back." The other men shifted uneasily, hands brushing the grips of their pistols. Samuel laughed, a hard, bitter sound. "Do you really think you can stop me? You're nothing but a hermit hiding from the world." Caleb raised his rifle. "Maybe, but I'm the kind of hermit who knows how to aim." The words hung heavy in the air. Then thunder. Gunfire cracked. The world exploded into chaos. One of Samuel's men fired first, the bullet slamming into the cabin door. Caleb returned fire, his shot clean, taking the man's hat clean off and sending him diving behind a log. "Enough!" Samuel shouted. "You'll die for her, old man." Caleb's eyes burned. If that's the cost, then it's worth paying. He fired again, the blast echoing through the valley. The second man went down, clutching his shoulder. Samuel, red with rage, drew his pistol and charged. Before Caleb could react, Isabel stepped out from behind him, eyes blazing. "Stop!" she cried. Samuel froze, stunned by the sight of her, no longer the trembling girl he'd broken, but a woman standing tall in the rain. "You think you own me," she said, her voice cutting through the storm. "But you lost me the first time you raised your hand." He sneered. "You ungrateful." The rest of his words vanished as Caleb slammed the rifle butt into his chest, sending him sprawling into the mud. "That's enough," Caleb said, breathing hard. "You'll leave this mountain and never come back." Samuel glared up at him, gasping. "You'll regret this?" "Not as much as you will if I ever see you again." He stumbled to his horse and fled, the storm swallowing him whole. Caleb turned, rain dripping from his hair, and found Isabel standing still, shaking but unbroken. "It's over," he said softly. She stepped toward him, tears mingling with the rain. "No, Caleb, it's beginning." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as the storm raged around them, the mountain bearing silent witness to a battle not just of flesh and blood, but of freedom and love. When the storm finally passed, Raven's Peak glistened beneath a pale morning sun. The rain had washed everything clean, the mud, the fear, even the ghosts that once haunted the cabin. Caleb stood on the porch, his rifle resting by the door, watching the mist rise from the valley. Beside him, Isabel, wrapped in his old wool coat, leaned against the railing. Her hair was damp, her cheeks flushed, but her eyes were alive again. "He's gone," Caleb said quietly. She nodded. "For good, this time." The silence that followed was peaceful, not the heavy silence of grief, but the kind that belongs to healing. A robin landed on the fence post, shaking its feathers as if declaring the mountain safe once more. Isabel turned to him, her voice trembling. "You could have killed him." Caleb met her gaze. "Wouldn't have made us any freer." Tears filled her eyes. "No one's ever fought for me before." He reached out, brushing a thumb along her cheek. "Then I'll be the first and the last man who ever needs to." She smiled, small but sure. "What happens now?" He glanced at the land spreading out before them, endless pine and promise. "We live, we plant that garden we talked about. Maybe build a bigger cabin, maybe fill it with laughter." She laughed softly. "And children?" He grinned. "If the mountain's kind enough to give us any." For a long moment they simply stood together, the sunlight breaking over the ridge. The mountain had given them pain, but it had also given them each other. Caleb took her hand, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're safe now, Isabel. If you'll have it, this is your home." And with that, the cabin on Raven's Peak stopped being a refuge for one broken soul and became a home built on love, strength, and second chances. Stories like Caleb and Isabel's remind us that love doesn't always arrive wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it crawls out of the wreckage, bleeding but alive. Healing isn't quick, and trust isn't easy. But when kindness meets courage, even the coldest mountain can bloom again. If you're listening to this somewhere in the world tonight, tell me where you're hearing this story from. Because no matter how far apart we are, tales like this remind us that every soul, no matter how broken or forgotten, deserves warmth, deserves safety, and most of all, deserves love.